Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firms podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com and the Big Four Accounting Firms YouTube channel. Before we get started, just wanted to remind everybody to support us if you have a chance or if you can. Even $1 helps, and we have a link in the description to a website called Buy Me a Coffee. It's just a way to donate to us and support us. Again, any amount is helpful so that we can keep putting out content. And there's also other ways for you to support us in the show notes to this podcast or on YouTube in the description. In today's podcast, we're going to be discussing E&Y's revenue results for 2020. And we're talking about the global results for E&Y. E&Y recently released their 2020 revenue numbers on September 10th, 2020. They reported revenues of $37.2 billion across the world, while in 2019, they reported revenues of $36.4 billion. And this means that revenue grew by only $800 million in 2020. And I know it's a lot of money, but that's not the normal growth we're used to at the Big Four accounting firms. And that represents about 4% growth for E&Y. And I'm sure they're pretty disappointed in this number, but it's still a good number with COVID-19 still going on. And their growth is better than PwC's growth in 2020. PwC had just 1.4% growth with their results, but PwC is still much bigger than E&Y is. Now, let's focus on the geographic regions of this revenue release. E&Y's most successful region was the Asia Pacific region with 8.5% growth. This is pretty astonishing with all that's going on around the world and how the coronavirus started in Asia. But we know that the Asia Pacific region did well because E&Y Australia had amazing results with about 12% growth. Now, the second best region in terms of growth was the Americas. The Americas had about 8% growth. And the final region for E&Y is the Emea region, which is Europe, Middle East, India, and Asia. And that had growth of 7%. And I'm not sure why E&Y doesn't break out their European results, but their European results are going to be interesting in the following years with all the regulation that's going on in the UK and other European countries as it relates to splitting up of auditing and consulting. But the greatest amount of revenue as far as regions is concerned still comes from the Americas. The Americas represents $17.2 billion of total revenue for Ernst & Young, and that's their largest region. Now, let's get into the employees. One of the most important things that many people are interested in is what did E&Y have to say about jobs? Well, they said a little bit, but not too much. And we can find this out by looking at the people section of their results. E&Y's employees grew from 284,000 to 298,965. And that's a pretty good increase in employees. That represents an increase of 5.3%. And the largest increase in people was in transaction advisory services with 7.2%. And they also mention how they stay committed to interns in fiscal year 20 by letting the interns still keep their internships. And they said they had 15,000 interns in that year, and half of them attended their internships virtually. Now, so if we take a deeper look at that, it's 5% growth in people, and they had 4% growth for E&Y. But that's pretty typical for E&Y. They always hire more people than their revenue growth, which means they're not really efficient in their costs. Because, for example, last year was better for them, though. They had 8.6% growth in people and an 8.3% growth in revenue. So last year you had a 1-for-1 relationship there. But because of everything that happened this year, they hired probably too many people and they weren't able to keep everybody chargeable. So that's probably why you see the decrease in revenue. But this is still much better than PwC, which I'm pretty curious about what happened there. And I think it might relate to transaction advisory services because that's something else that E&Y spoke about. And with that, I want to talk about some other items of note. E&Y mentioned that their digital audit tool has analyzed over 1 trillion lines of client data. And this is a key metric for people to use in their E&Y interviews to bring up as something interesting to talk about, because if they're pushing it in this financial report, that means it's important to them, and then they want their clients and their prospective employees to know about it. Another item of note that they mentioned is that advisory started a new technology consulting services. And this should be for anybody that's interested in technology consulting. Now you know that EY has a practice specifically devoted to that, and that's in the advisory service line. And the last item of note that I wanted to discuss was EY said they advised on 6 of the top 10 largest deals globally in 2020 from their transaction advisory services group. And this is why I think maybe they did a little bit better than PwC. If they're advising on some of the largest mergers and transactions around the world, then that's a good way to make revenue in a down time no matter what. So those are the updates today. We're probably going to be going into a little bit more detail into this report because I'm still researching it and I'm still finding the best way to discuss it because there's some other things in here and I want to provide it in the best way possible. So make sure to subscribe to this podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel, support us in the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes to this podcast. And if you can't, go over to our YouTube, subscribe, like the video, and comment on the channel to help us out and help us keep creating content. Thanks for listening.